In morgues, silence is deceiving. It looks like just routine, until something happens that nobody can explain. Today, you're gonna hear 5 morgue horror stories that challenge the very basics of what the human eye considers possible. In the story you're about to hear, a shadow showed up between 2 storage cabinets, even though there wasn't even enough space for a person to stand there. But before we start, make sure you're subscribed so you don't miss any terrifying stories. And tell me here in the comments what city or country you're watching this video from. I was on my night shift at the morgue, and what I'm about to tell you still gets to me, even now, thinking back on it calmly. Up until that point, I treated everything there as just another technical, practical, professional environment. But that night made me realize some things inside that building don't follow the same logic as the rest of the world. And I'm not exaggerating. In there, at certain moments, it feels like you're not alone. You sense something watching, and it's not imagination, not paranoia. What I saw between those cabinets wasn't some movie monster or a trick of the eye. It was real enough to leave its mark on how I see that hallway to this day. It all started with a scene I still can't describe any other way than unsettling. I was staring down that aisle between the cold storage drawers when I noticed a dark shape moving, like it was passing through a space where there wasn't enough room to pass. It was fast. A tall, shapeless blur. No face, no details, no edges. Just a dark mass shifting with purpose. And I remember, before I could even process what I'd seen, my body reacted first. My chest tightened. My shoulders locked up instantly. It was like my body understood before I did that this wasn't normal. I stood there staring down that same hallway as if waiting a few seconds might make it happen again. But it didn't. And I was left with this clear, logical, yet irrational feeling. That shouldn't be here. After that, I took a few steps back, trying to rationalize, to make sense of what the hell had just happened. And naturally, I started thinking about how the night had begun, because it started completely normal. It was a Friday in autumn, and the morgue was quiet. No frantic hospital staff running up and down, just a regular night shift. I was with Sarah and Jake, my assistants, and Morris was there too, as always, at the security desk. He was at the monitors, checking cameras and general feeds. We were chatting about light stuff, normal topics, no drama. The kind of night where you think you'll clock out right on time and head home. The 2 arrivals came almost back to back. A man who died in a car crash and a woman with a suspected overdose. Cases we handle multiple times a month. Nothing that stood out on its own. The process was the same as always. Reception, identification, logging into the system, tagging, then assigning the right drawers. I remember filling out the tablet while Sarah organized the labels and Jake checked the instruments near the cart. Everything by the book. Nothing in that moment suggested anything out of the ordinary was about to happen, but that's when the first break in routine happened. Sarah froze mid-motion. She locked up, staring down the aisle of cabinets. She managed to look terrified without saying a word. Her face went rigid, her eyes fixed, and she said, still staring ahead, that she'd seen a tall shadow moving between the rows. I remember trying to calm her, saying it could have been a reflection, but she didn't look away. She said that shadow wasn't from any object. She said it looked like someone big but with no clear shape, moving way too fast. That's when Jake looked too, and he went pale. He said he'd just seen the same thing, and what unsettled me the most wasn't that they'd seen it. It was where they'd seen it. Because that space between the cabinets barely has room for someone to stand, let alone walk. You've got drawers on one side, drawers on the other, and a wall. There's no opening for human movement. So how was something the size of a person moving in there, in that narrow aisle, if it wasn't human? That kind of question messes with your logic. You try to find an explanation, try to fit it into some kind of physical reasoning, but you can't. We called Morris over to check the cameras. He had that usual disinterested look, like he thought it was a false alarm, but he checked. He noted the time Sarah had mentioned and pulled up the footage. And that's when things got serious. Because at the exact minute they'd seen the shadow, the video had a 5-second gap. Not pixelation, not visual interference, not image noise. effect was literally a jump, 5 seconds missing, like someone had edited that part out. But that system doesn't allow editing. It's locked down. Updated by hospital administration. Not just anyone can mess with it. When Morris saw that, for the first time in a long time, I saw him get uncomfortable too. The next day, administration tried to brush it off as a compression glitch. But that explanation didn't fit. The software had been updated 2 weeks prior. No cuts like that had ever happened before. And you're supposed to believe that at that exact minute, when 2 people witnessed something unusual, the recording just happened to fail? It was a coincidence no one there could swallow. And after that night, others started talking about it too. Because it wasn't just that one time. The shadow came back, always in that same area by the cabinets, always in that narrow space where no one walks. Colleagues on the morning shift started reporting things. I thought I saw someone back there. It looked like something moved at the end. I thought someone was standing there watching me. But when they turned to check, no one was there. It was like whatever it was stayed just a second ahead of your direct gaze, like it only moved when you weren't fully focused on it. And people there learned something. When you've got multiple, unrelated people reporting the same thing in the same spot, it stops being just a tall tale. We ran tests, trying to find a rational explanation. Turned off the overhead lights, left only the side ones to check for reflections. Nothing. Checked the ventilation to see if any airflow was causing temperature distortion. Nothing. Tried taking photos, tried recording with our phones. Never caught anything. And that only made it weirder, because the phenomenon only happened when no camera was directly pointed at it. It was like whatever it was knew when it was being watched. There was one moment that really stuck with Sarah. She was labeling a tray and clearly felt like someone had come up behind her, like a person was standing near her shoulder, breathing. She turned, thinking someone had walked up, but no one was there. And she swore she felt the air shift. She swore she felt a presence. And when she looked toward the cabinets, there it was again, that same quick visual trace, moving toward the same section of drawers. After that, I developed this involuntary habit. Every time I finished my shift and went to close up, I'd look down that aisle of cabinets. I don't know if it was to check for safety or if it was to try and understand if whatever it was stood there, watching. And sometimes, even when I didn't see anything directly, I'd feel a focus coming from there. There's no technical term for it, no way to put it in a report, but there's a specific feeling when something in the environment is locked onto you, even if you can't see it. That's what it was. It didn't feel like just a shadow passing through. It felt like whatever it was had some kind of intention, like it was waiting for something. Administration didn't want to investigate further. No one wanted to spend money bringing in experts to analyze anomalies or electromagnetic radiation. They'd rather pretend it was all in our heads, so we, the staff, had to live with it. And when a group of people lives with something unexplained for long enough, it becomes part of the routine. Not because it's normal, but because there's no way out. You get used to the fact that it's there, like someone who gets used to a noise in their car engine they can't fix, or a floorboard that always creaks at night. You recognize the problem, but you don't solve it. I still work there. I still do my job exactly like before. I still open drawers, close drawers, sign forms, log entries. I didn't quit, but now I'm aware of a limit. There's something there that doesn't fit the logic of the place, and it manifests in that hallway. It doesn't try to talk. It doesn't show itself head on. It only lets itself be seen just enough, always at the edge of your vision. And I'm left with this question. Is it trapped in that space, or is it waiting for someone to get too close so it can follow? Creepy, right? What did you think about that story? What score from 0 to 10 would you give it? Tell me in the comments. It's strange to think that shadow didn't even need form to dominate the whole room, and yet, it felt like it had its own consciousness. And when the unexplainable touches the physical body of a dead person, the disturbance becomes even more real. Like in the next story you're about to hear, where the body was still bleeding, even after death. I was alone in the room that night, I remember the cold glow of the overhead lights and how the air felt still, like no one had breathed in there for hours. It wasn't just the absence of noise, it was the kind of silence that feels like the room itself is watching. Anyone who's worked in a morgue knows exactly what I'm talking about. Some nights are normal. Some nights you feel like something is watching you back. I felt it even before I unzipped the black body bag. And I don't usually tell people this because if you haven't been in that environment, you'd just call it imagination. But if you have, you know. I've spent entire nights in there and seen things I can't explain. This night was one of them. He came in as a John Doe, no ID, found under a bridge. The report said probable natural causes. I already knew from the type of case that he was likely homeless. It wasn't the first time. There's something that hits you when you unzip the bag and see a whole life reduced to 3 lines of text. But the first thing that struck me was his face. His eyes were squeezed shut, not the usual dead man stare. They were clenched tight, like someone who'd just seen something they never wanted to see. I looked at him and felt uneasy right away. I couldn't ignore it. I've seen a lot of dead bodies, but never like this. I started the procedure, hooked up the equipment, checked the artery, adjusted everything. All standard. But I kept staring at his face because there was no way to ignore that tension. It looked like he died scared. And I'm not being poetic. I mean, his muscles were locked. I touched near his eye with my gloved hand. Nothing seemed off at first. I kept prepping. I was focused on making the incision when I saw the first drop trickle from the corner of his eye. Tiny, but red, not fluid. Blood. You need to understand, this doesn't just happen. Blood doesn't start seeping spontaneously from the eye of a corpse that's been here for over 10 hours. I froze. Watched that little drop slide down his skin. I dabbed it with gauze, cleaned it, waited, and another drop formed. I swear, in that moment, it felt like he was crying. And I don't mean metaphorically, I mean literally, like a tear. Of blood. Slow. Like something inside him was still pushing it out. I thought about vascular leakage, some kind of rupture that started draining now because of the movement. I tried to rationalize it. But then came a second drop, and another. Slow, but steady. My whole body reacted. The air in the room got heavier. That feeling of being watched intensified. It was like the temperature in the room had shifted. I don't have a scientific explanation for it. I just know what I felt. As I tried to make sense of it, I looked at his face again. And right then, I felt him there. Not the body. Him. The man. A presence. Like someone was standing inches from me, staring right at my face, waiting for me to do something. It wasn't imagination. It was physical. That invisible pressure you feel on your back when someone is standing right behind you. I stood there for a few seconds, not moving, the body bleeding from the eyes, and I couldn't pretend I wasn't seeing it. When I finally got back to work, I was talking to him in my mind, like, I'm here, I'm taking care of you, I'm doing this right. I'd never done that before, but it felt necessary. I needed him to know I was there to do my job properly, that I wasn't ignoring him. The more I worked, the more the bleeding persisted. I cleaned it up 7 times. And it always came back, not a flood. 1 drop at a time, but constant, like something was still leaking out of him slowly. That's when I realized this wasn't normal. I've handled bodies with ruptured ocular vessels. It's messy. This wasn't that. This was something else. Halfway through, the room became unbearably heavy. It wasn't just fear. It was presence. A thick, spiritual weight. That's when I admitted to myself that there was more there than just a body. It wasn't just a body. It was a story that hadn't been released, an ending that didn't fit, something that had followed him to his last second, and I was the only one there acknowledging that he was still there. The supervisor came in when I called him over. He saw the blood, glanced at it, lifted the eyelid slightly and said what any supervisor would. Could be residual bleeding. But his face gave him away. He'd never seen anything like it. He stood there for a few seconds, then left with the usual technical jargon. But deep down, he was just as shaken as I was. When I was alone again, the bleeding continued. I finished everything calmly, kept cleaning it up each time it returned. It seemed like the more the procedure progressed, the less it happened. It was only at the very end, as I was closing up, that the bleeding finally stopped. All at once, like it had been drained, like whatever was inside had finally been let out. And when it stopped, the tension in his face vanished. The muscles relaxed. This wasn't my imagination, it was physical. His face softened, like only then, at the very end, had he released something that had been trapped. The next day, word came in. The only possible family was a distant cousin. She wanted something simple, no ceremony. I felt a heavy weight when I heard that, because this guy had died invisible, lived invisible, and only there, on that table, bleeding from his eyes, had anyone truly seen him. I don't think of him as the John Doe. I think of him as the man who bled from his eyes to be seen. And I keep this case as the strangest and most human experience I've ever had. Because in that morgue that night, I learned something. Some bodies don't just come in to be prepared. Some bodies come to release the last thing that still needed to get out. And sometimes that thing is pain. Sometimes it's fear. Sometimes it's what's left of a person's entire life. In this case, the last thing that came out was blood from his eyes. And that's what made me realize that in that moment, I wasn't alone in the room. He was there with me until the very end. And I know a lot of people might doubt it, but I lived it. And there's no way to erase that from my memory. Insane, right? It's impossible not to think that some bodies carry things that didn't end there, things that want out. And sometimes they come out as a sound, a word, a request. Like in the next story you're about to hear, where a whisper came from inside a locked cabinet. Working the night shift in a morgue is an experience nobody truly understands until they've lived it. The cold lighting, the forced silence, the constant chill in the air. Most people think the worst part is seeing the bodies, but it's not. It's the silence. The silence is what weighs on you. It makes you think. It makes you notice the tiniest details. When I started that shift, I already knew it was going to be a long night. I was alone because the tech who usually shared the shift with me had to leave early. Something with his kid. I didn't mind. It was overtime I needed, so I stayed, locked in that place, with this strange feeling that time slows down inside a morgue. Around 1 a.m., a new body arrived, and this one was dressed. That alone put me on edge because it's unusual. He was wearing brown slacks, a white dress shirt, and a regular wristwatch, and the watch was running. I remember clearly seeing the second hand moving. The feeling you get when you see a watch still ticking on a dead man's wrist is like something's out of place. Like the world is functioning wrong. The doctor who did the initial check jotted down that it was probably an accidental overdose, but would confirm in the morning during the full autopsy. I just helped position the body, filled out my part of the paperwork, slid him into drawer 2A, closed it, and got back to work. I was in the main room organizing some files, prepping basic supplies to leave ready for the day shift. Sometimes I'd walk over to the drawer area to grab or return something. Everything was normal, until I heard a noise. It was quick, short, like a word spoken in a low tone, but it was clear enough that I turned toward the sound. At first I thought, must be the AC or something like that, but I made a mental note. The sound came from the drawer area, specifically from the side where drawer 4B was, and that night 4B was empty. I tried to ignore it, kept doing my thing. When you work in a place like this, your brain tries to protect you by rationalizing everything. But 10-15 minutes later, it happened again. This time clearer, more human, closer. I was about 5 meters from the refrigeration unit, and it sounded like someone was right there behind the door, whispering through the metal. But I knew no one was in there. 4B was empty, and yet I had this awful feeling of being watched up close. Not the kind of fear you see in movies, the real physical discomfort of someone being too close to your face. I walked over, stood in front of 4B, put my hand on the metal. It was cold. I leaned my ear a little closer, not pressed against it, but close enough to show I was paying attention. and nothing. Zero. No sound, no voice. I went back to the main desk and wrote in the log, "Auditory anomaly near refrigeration unit." That's it. No details, no description. I didn't want anyone asking questions later. I didn't want to have to justify revisiting that incident. The night went on. The dressed body stayed where it was. The ticking of his watch kept popping into my head. I tried not to look at drawer 2A, but I did, because a watch still running on a dead man's wrist breaks logic. You know the guy isn't there anymore, but the object on his body keeps moving, marking time like nothing happened. And I started thinking about it. When someone dies, time stops for them. But for everyone else, time keeps going. Maybe that difference creates some kind of strange noise. I can't explain it. It's just a feeling. Morning came, the autopsy confirmed the accidental overdose, and the watch was given to the family. They'd asked for it. I remember that because it was the last time I looked at the dead man's wrist. It was just a regular watch, nothing expensive. But the contrast was huge. That second hand moving on someone who wasn't breathing anymore. After that, the body was released for the funeral. I moved on with my life, kept working. But I never forgot that night, because it was the only time in years of working in the morgue that I heard something I can say with 100% certainty wasn't equipment, wasn't air, wasn't the building, wasn't the radio, wasn't anyone. It was a voice saying something short, but I couldn't make out the words. And when I think about where the sound came from, I'm absolutely certain it was from drawer 4B, and 4B was empty. After that night, I never heard anything like it again. Not with brutal cases, not with violent deaths, not with traumatic ones. Nothing. Just that one night. And the more time passes, the more I wonder if it wasn't just a quick psychotropic blip from my brain in a tense environment, or if there's really some kind of echo of life that lingers in a place where the body is no longer there. I don't have an answer, but I know what I felt in that moment. And what I felt wasn't baseless paranoia. It was the sensation that someone was there, trying to speak, like the silence of the morgue had turned into a presence. And what haunts me the most is that I'll never know what that voice was trying to say, because it was just a whisper, like there wasn't enough time to finish the sentence. Looking back now, what scares me isn't the voice itself. It's the fact that it never happened again. Not once. That was the only entry I ever logged as an auditory anomaly. And that drawer, after that shift, never had anything strange again. Just that one night, that one specific moment. And sometimes I think, the whisper wasn't asking for help, and it wasn't threatening. The feeling was more intimate, more direct, like it was calling me. And that, to me, is the most unsettling part, because when a noise stands out in total silence, it's because that silence isn't completely empty. And that night, in that moment, in that drawer, I'm certain someone or something tried to communicate. And I didn't hear what I needed to hear. So I'm left with the question, and it won't leave my head. Terrifying, right? Some things try to communicate at the lowest volume possible, and that scares more than any scream. But others manifest through matter, through the air, through temperature. Like in the story you'll hear next, where the cold concentrated in only one single spot of the morgue. But before we continue, if you made it this far, that means you're enjoying the stories, so go ahead and hit the like button to let YouTube know you like this kind of content, and don't miss any more horror stories. When I first started working at the morgue, I figured the weirdest things I'd see would be related to bodies, autopsies, or traumatic situations. But what stuck with me the most wasn't any of that. It was something simple, physical, something no one can explain. It's not an apparition. It's not a shadow, it's not a figure, it's a patch of floor, a section near a metal drain where the temperature is absurdly colder than the rest of the room. It's been like that for years, and no matter who walks in there, if they pay attention, they notice it. The room has air conditioning, so it's always cooler than outside. But that spot, it's on another level. I measured it, over a 10-degree difference, and it never changes. I even checked on a day when the AC was off for maintenance and the rest of the room was hot and stuffy. But that one spot, still freezing, like there was a slab of ice just beneath the tile. When I showed it to maintenance, they laughed at first, thought I was exaggerating or that it was just some channeled airflow. They spent 3 days poking around, measuring, lifting floor panels, checking pipes, even running a thermal camera. The camera showed a cold void, no icy pipes underneath, no airflow from the AC, just concentrated cold, no technical cause, and it became a thing. Because when you work in a place like this, everything becomes routine. But this didn't fit. It wasn't just the temperature. Over time, it was impossible not to notice an obvious pattern. Bodies from violent deaths, especially gunshots and stabbings, always ended up on the tables near that drain. It wasn't a choice. It wasn't superstition, just standard workflow. But for some reason, the worst cases always ended up in that corner. And when those bodies were there, something else happened. A mist. I'm not exaggerating. It wasn't condensation from the AC. I saw it, many times. A small, low cloud hugging the floor, like some kind of freezing breath was being exhaled from the drain. It was quick, just 2 or 3 seconds, like a faint puff of condensation. Very visible. I remember the first time I saw it. I was alone, setting up supplies to prep a gunshot victim. I hadn't even unzipped the body bag yet. When I turned, I saw this cold breath rise from the floor near the drain, like the ground itself was breathing. My first reaction wasn't fear, it was confusion. I even walked over thinking there might be a leak, but no smell, no sound, nothing technical to explain it. And it kept happening, not every day, but always in the same spot, always near that drain, and more often when the body there had died violently. Over time, no one wanted to be alone in that part of the room. The supervisor pretended it was no big deal, but he avoided walking near it. One employee requested a permanent transfer. A technician said she'd get stomach aches if she stayed there too long. And these weren't jumpy people. They were practical. People who deal with death every day. People who've seen mutilation, burns, exposed bones, and don't flinch. But in that corner, near that drain, their expressions changed. And there was something else. A feeling that's impossible to describe scientifically. The sense of being watched. I'm not talking about imagination. It was clear. Whenever someone stood in that area for more than a minute, their body reacted. Heart rate up, breathing uneven. Like their body was trying to get them to leave. You couldn't stay neutral. I started noticing a pattern in myself, too. Without realizing it, I'd walk around the table from the other side. I avoided stepping in that area. It was automatic, a change in how I moved. I couldn't control it. My body decided for me. And when I finally realized what I was doing, I understood. My mind had already labeled that spot as dangerous, even though there was nothing visible there. There was one night I'll never forget. A suicide by gunshot. The face was completely unrecognizable, heavy even for someone used to it. I was with a newer colleague. He was trying hard to show he could handle it, but as I organized the supplies, I noticed he was getting restless. I could tell because he kept glancing at the drain like he was expecting something to come out of it. And then it happened again, the mist. But this time, it wasn't a quick puff. It rose slower, about 5 centimeters off the ground, like it had more weight to it. He dropped what he was holding, walked out without a word, and never came back. Later, he requested a shift change. He never wanted to work the night shift again. I swear to you, the impression I get, and this isn't a metaphor, is that something is trapped there. Not a spirit wandering, not a ghost slamming doors. It's a concentrated energy of human suffering, pinned to one specific centimeter of space. Like that drain is a drainage point for something that was never fully drained. Like the pain from the last seconds of life for people who died violently got stuck there. I'm not trying to invent some mystical explanation, but I can't pretend it's not real, because it is. A lot of people think the scariest thing in a morgue is a ghost standing there or a figure appearing behind a door. But I'll tell you this, the worst terror is when the phenomenon is physical, when it's measurable, when it's observable, when you measure the temperature and it doesn't make sense, when you see condensation appear with no technical cause, When you realize your own mind changes how you move when you get near a specific spot. The biggest proof that this isn't made up? The cold spot never moves. Never. If it were piping, it would warm up at some point during the day. If it were airflow, it would shift with the ventilation. If it were a leak, maintenance would have fixed it by now. It doesn't change. It's always the same spot. The same patch of floor, the same distance from the table, the same drain. And I know it sounds strange when I say I avoid that drain, but it's true. It's not because I think a hand is going to reach out and pull me in. It's because my body learned not to stay there. I walk by and automatically curve my path. It becomes natural, instinct. Like my body is saying, there's something there. Don't touch it. Sometimes I wonder, what if the drain isn't where something is? What if the drain is the boundary? What if it's just the edge? Like there's something on the other side that doesn't belong here. It doesn't change anything in practice. We keep working. The bodies keep coming. But the feeling stays. And every time I accidentally step there, even after all these years, and feel the cold seep through the sole of my shoe and up my ankle, I feel the same thing. There's something there. Something that doesn't move, doesn't speak, doesn't show itself, but something that watches. And the worst part? Knowing it's not over. Because tomorrow or next week or next month, another violent death will come in. The tables will be full. Workflow will send the case to that corner, and someone new will see that first puff rise. And they'll know, just like I do now, that not everything in this place is just a body on the table. Some things stay, and they're still there. So creepy, right? Did you feel that too? Tell me what you think in the comments. I can describe the exact feeling to you because I remember it like it was yesterday. I was in the dead of night, sitting near the stainless steel counter, reviewing some old reports on the computer, when the refrigeration system alarm went off for the first time. It was a newly renovated morgue, with one of those digital cooling systems the company swears eliminates any human variable. Fully automated, temperature controlled, a sensor in every drawer. If a drawer opens, or if the internal temperature rises by more than 0.2 of a degree, the panel flags it. But that night, it flagged something that made no sense. I looked at the panel, and it showed a temperature fluctuation in an empty drawer. Drawer 6B, empty. No body, no biological material, nothing. I didn't panic right away. I know systems, I've worked with worse. Systems glitch, sensors fail, wires come loose. Normal stuff. So I got up, walked over to the secondary control panel and checked the compressor's direct readout. Temperature was normal. Nothing out of the ordinary. I figured it was just a bug. I reset the alert. Everything was fine again. But I remember the time. It was 2:20 a.m., not a random hour. And that matters because it didn't stop there. The next night, same time, same alert, same drawer. 6B again, the same minimal temperature variation, like someone had pulled the drawer slightly open, just enough for ambient air to slip in. No one had touched that drawer. I was alone. I hadn't dozed off on the job. My body's wired for night shifts. I'm always awake. But this stuck with me because I felt the same sensation I get when someone's watching me, even when the room is empty. That feeling of being observed, and you don't know from where. Only this was worse because there was no one alive in that room but me. By the third night, I'll admit I was getting pissed. I thought, I'll record this and prove it's a malfunction. I left my phone recording the panel screen. Sure enough, 2:20 a.m. The alarm blared. But this time I noticed something new. The system display didn't just show a temperature variation. Now it read, "Closure interruption," like someone had pulled the drawer out. The system had detected movement, but I looked at the drawer and it was closed. Physically closed. I even tested pulling it manually to see if it was stuck. It was fine. I stood there for a while, staring at the rubber seal. No displacement. The drawer hadn't moved. The next morning I told the team. Small team, by the way. Hardly anyone wanted to take the night shift in that morgue. Some say the silence there is different. I always brushed it off as superstition. But when I mentioned the 6B alarm, everyone got this uncomfortable look. The boss authorized calling the installation company because the equipment was new. The techs came, opened the panels, tested the wires, tested the sensors. They checked everything. They even replaced the sensor in drawer 6B. And in their report, it says, "No defects found." I was expecting that, because by then I already knew the issue wasn't technical. I asked them to leave the new sensor in place and said I'd run a test that night. I took a newly arrived body, prepped it, and placed it in drawer 6B. I did this an hour before the alarm's usual time. Everything was locked, sealed, perfect. At 2:20 a.m., the panel beeped as usual. But this time, the message wasn't just about temperature. It was a specific alert I'd never seen before. Drawer opened during occupancy. But the drawer was closed. I ran to check. Closed. Sealed. The weight of the body inside. No displacement of the rubber seal. Nothing had moved physically. I stood there staring at the cold metal and felt a chill creep up from my heels to the back of my neck. It was a supernatural experience without any visual or auditory effect. It was logical. Because it shouldn't be possible. Either the drawer opens or it doesn't. A sensor doesn't invent events that don't exist. Sensors can fail, but they don't invent specific types of movement that aren't in their own history. After that test, no one wanted to use drawer 6B anymore. I didn't ask for it, didn't order anything, but in practice, the drawer became avoided by instinct. One employee said it felt like something was coming back, and that no one should occupy someone else's place. I didn't encourage that talk at first, but deep down, I started thinking about the idea of return. The dead don't have will. That's what I always thought. But the system's behavior wasn't random. The nights passed and I started noticing something else. 6B wasn't fixed. A week later, another empty drawer triggered the alarm at the same time. Now it was 4D, empty. The exact same minimal temperature variation. Like someone had pulled a drawer and pushed it back before it fully opened. I realized then it wasn't about the drawer number. It wasn't a single sensor failing. It was the act. Always between 2:15 and 2:25 a.m. Always in empty drawers. And worse, it never repeated the same drawer after 2 or 3 cycles. It was like something was moving from drawer to drawer, searching for something. And I started noticing something subjective but clear to me. The feeling wasn't of a place full of the dead. It was of a place with something searching for someone. One night, a new employee working the shift with me looked at the panel when the alarm went off and asked, with the most casual tone in the world, "Do you think the bodies don't want to leave?" I should have laughed. I should have told him to stop romanticizing the job. But I was speechless for a few seconds and I realized that question hit me deep. Because the feeling I had, and still have sometimes, is exactly that. The morgue isn't just a place where people are stored after they die. It feels like a place where they briefly return before going somewhere no one understands. I started documenting everything, including the exact times. Every occurrence fell within the same 10-minute window. Never outside it. Never by accident during the day. Never. And I'll say this to anyone who doubts, the alarm never went off outside that window. I started thinking in terms of frequency, pattern, logic. I began to see the morgue as a stage for strange events that weren't tied to a single body or a specific case. It was like a collective behavior, like there was an invisible routine. Someone visits. Someone leaves a mark on the sensor. Someone returns. Someone passes through. It's easy to say it's delusion, but try ignoring months of automatic triggers, always at the same time, always in empty drawers, always detecting movement where no physical movement is possible. The morgue system is digital, not some analog setup from 20 years ago, not a mechanical sensor vibrating from the compressor. It's microprocessor readings, thermal variation algorithms, position tracking. It's not a system that gets spooked by shadows. And here's a detail no one there likes to talk about, but it's the part that bothers me the most. There was one night when the alarm went off, and I was used to the timing by then. I didn't look right away. I let it ring for a few seconds, and I swear to you I felt a spiritual presence in there. I can't explain it. There was no sound, no door slamming, but it was like I clearly sensed I wasn't alone. I stood still, breathing slowly, feeling that negative energy that doesn't come from ordinary fear. It was colder than the refrigerated air in the chamber, like something had come back just to check if anyone still remembered it existed. These days, we just live with it. No one tries to prove anything anymore. The company has replaced 2 sensors, reviewed the panel, recalibrated the system, updated the firmware. Nothing worked. And if you ask me if I think there's logic to it, I'd say no, not human logic. But the pattern exists. It's not random. It's not a random defect. It's ritual. It's a cycle. It's return. It's something passing through and leaving a trace on the machine. Some employees avoid even mentioning those drawers. Some prefer using the ones upstairs. There are night shifts where no one turns on the main lights. They just leave the dim lighting on, like it's safer not to see everything too clearly. I've accepted that it's part of the job. I don't try to force logic onto everything anymore. I just document it when it happens and wait for it to pass. The alarm keeps going, every night, same time, always in an empty drawer, never in the same place for long. It's like something is circling, testing each space reserved for death, as if it's coming back just to see if there's still a place for it here. And I keep going to work, opening drawers, closing drawers, prepping bodies, filling out reports, checking the system like everything's normal. But I always pay attention when the clock hits 2:15, because I know that in that 10-minute window, something that shouldn't be here anymore is trying to return. And the part that bothers me the most is that none of the technology we have today can block it, understand it, or stop it. No one has. And we've learned to live with it. And deep down, the only question I can't get out of my head is, if all this is some kind of brief return, then what happens after 2:25 a.m. when it leaves again? Where exactly does it spend the rest of the night? Because I'm starting to think the morgue isn't the end. It's just a waypoint, and there's something that always comes back, even if no one wants to believe it. And after an alarm went off showing movement inside an empty drawer, I just keep thinking how some presences don't need a body to keep coming back. If you enjoy these kinds of stories and you like this open conversation about the unexplainable, subscribe here. I'm bringing content like this all the time. And write one simple word in the comments so I know you made it this far. Alarm. That helps me understand that you're part of this group that stays until the end. Hit the like button too, because that makes YouTube show these stories to more people who love real mystery. Oh, and there's a video right here next to this one with more terrifying stories. Click it and keep going with me over there.